As people are well aware, I've been growing vanilla orchids for about 18 months right now, and I have one outside the grow tent and 4 inside the grow tent, and there's a very big difference between this one and those. However, before I'm going to explain what's the difference between inside a grow tent and outside, I have to do a little bit of a backstory. I've been growing vanilla orchids for about 18 months due to a request from Mexico from an orchid farmer that had actually a lot of problems, and the biggest problem was the fertilizer they are using. And the biggest problem that the orchid grower, or the vanilla orchid grower, had in Mexico was their fertilizer. They're using a very poor, very cheap fertilizer. So I do get it, because economics, they want to have cheap fertilizer, but the biggest problem is when you have expensive plants and the end product is very costly. You want to have something that makes it a little bit easier to grow. So I designed a fertilizer, and I actually designed 2 of them. However, I created 2 products. They're actually identical in NPK. However, this product is more designed for commercial growers, and this is more for the home growers. So there's a big difference. Also, there's a big difference in cost. But yeah, I created a monster because I'm out of growing space. Vanilla orchids are more than 2 meters high right now, and it's all amazing, but yeah. The observant person noticed that this vanilla orchid is very small, not really doing well. And also there's a version 1 with those 2. Now actually there's a version 1, a version 2, and there's a version 3. And there's a big difference between the 3 of them. Version 1 is exactly the same as this one. However, it's inside the grow tent, so it's a little bit more happy, a little bit taller. It's actually about 20 centimeters taller. But it's a little bit, yeah, the evolution between that one and that one, there's a big difference. And the evolution between version 1 and version 2 is version 2 is producing a little bit bigger leaves, as you can see, and it's also a little bit taller. And yeah, as I told you in the beginning, I created a monster because these 2 is version 3, and yeah, it reached the end of the grow tent. Keep in mind, growing vanilla orchid isn't something that's very easy, especially in a country like Holland. I know a lot of people think it's very wet, it's very rainy, and it's very humid here, but actually we live in brick and mortar. We don't live in wooden houses like in the United States. And the biggest problem with that is that inside of the house it's actually very dry, even when it's raining outside. As you can see, I'm sweating because it's 28 degrees outside, and the humidity outside is between, I don't know, 70 and 80%. Yeah, inside is 55 and it's 26 degrees. So there lies my problem. Inside is very dry, and when it's hot outside it's even drier inside, and in the winter period it's even worse. The plant that I did show in the beginning, this one, didn't want to grow at all, and it's due to the humidity. It's very dry, and the plant isn't producing any roots, or very little roots, or it's drying out its roots, so it doesn't grow as fast as inside the grow tent. So by even giving it a lot of fertilizer, it's still not growing, because the aerial roots need to have moisture, it needs fertilizer and all that stuff. And when there's no roots, there's no growth, and the plant is stunned. And it took me about 1, maybe even 1.5 years just to grow them about 1 meter. It's a very slow growing plant and it needs ideal conditions, and in Holland it's not ideal. However, when I got the grow tent from this height all the way to the top, it took about 6 weeks. And I do know a lot of people think I know everything about plants, but I actually don't. I know a lot about peppers, and I do know a lot about tomatoes, but vanilla orchids, I actually don't know shit about it. So it took me a while just to figure it out, how to grow them in Holland with very, very poor conditions, and eventually had to buy or had to get a grow tent with lights, and had to adapt to Home Assistant to do an automation. I figured it out. First of all, the fertilizer. Yes, it does need a lot of fertilizer, but it doesn't need a lot of water. It's actually a myth that these plants need a lot of water. They need a high humidity, and there's a big difference between it. Second, these plants are very, very prone to root rot. It's called Pythium, and it's very, very serious. When you don't control it and don't do preventing root rot at all, it's gonna create a lot of problems, especially in a grow tent, because it's a closed environment and it's very humid, and yeah, you don't want to have to do root rot control damage or damage control, because it's gonna slow down the growth. Yeah, it's just not the right way. So root rot prevention is key. Preventing root rot with stuff like Aard's root rot treatment, or something in the United States. I don't know what the stuff is over there, but it needs something. I know a lot of people say, well, you don't need it, but in this case, CO2. You do need it in a grow tent. I don't care if it's just a little tablet which you put in water and it's creating CO2, or if you're getting a petroleum kachel, or I don't know how you call it in the United States, but a heater that's run on petrol. Inside a grow tent with vanilla orchids, you do need CO2, and you do need a lot of it actually. Between 1400 and 1600 ppm it shoots in, and it takes about 10 hours to get below 600 ppm. So between the morning and the evening, when the sun is shining and the lights are on, it gets a lot of CO2, and it's a big part of the growth with vanilla orchid. By the way, when you live in a home and you're using a heater that's run on petroleum or gas, or I don't know, petrol, or you're a heavy breather, or you fart a lot, you don't need it. But I'm not always home and I want to grow orchids fast, so I use a dry system and I shoot in a little bit of CO2 once a day, and it creates an environment that's more suitable for these plants to grow fast. And it's not like the other orchids don't grow at all, because this orchid just had a flower and now it's full. And this one is even crazier, because they're growing like crazy. These plants are getting exactly the same fertilizer as that one. But the biggest difference is those get CO2, those get the humidity of the environment in Mexico, so between 70 and 80%, and the temperature is monitored between 26 and 28 degrees all day. By the way, you don't need to put in CO2 in the night, because no photosynthesis, no CO2 absorption, so there's no need for it. By the way, the biggest problem with my fertilizer is the big ass roots. It's something else. I have some roots here that over half a meter, and they are just growing downwards. I've never seen that before, but obviously it's nature, so it's going to produce a lot of roots. But a lot of people that are growing vanilla orchids don't know that those roots are very sensitive to climate changes, in this case humidity. When it's very dry, you can see there, the roots are drying out, and when the roots are drying out, guess what? They don't do shit. So it's a big ass problem. Therefore, this plant is not growing, and those are, because they have a lot of roots all over the place actually. But I know for sure that a lot of people want fertilizer or fertilizer for the orchids, for vanilla orchids, or for the pretty orchids. However, this fertilizer is not for sale on the website from top plant food. However, when you send a request to the email, I know for sure that top plant food will help you. But I only fertilize them once in 2 weeks. I give them more water than fertilizer. But the fertilizer that they need is very specialized, and it doesn't like chlorine, and it doesn't like calcium for some reason. Fertilizer does contain a little bit of calcium, so the plants can grow optimal, but it doesn't contain any chlorine. And when I made the switch, all this growth took about 2 months, from here all the way there, so more than 1 meter. So that's the update about the vanilla orchids. I'm very happy right now. They are growing very fast. It grows in a month more than 45 to 50 centimeters, especially with the high temperature, the humidity in the grow tent. So I'm very happy. It took me a long time before I figured out that the humidity inside my home is terrible. Because it took me more than a year just to figure it out. I couldn't figure it out. I didn't understand it. Why the hell did the plant not grow? And the peppers, well, I don't know how to call them in America, but we call them lepelplanten, grew actually very good. They produced flowers every 6 to 8 weeks. I'm actually allergic for them. But the vanilla orchids didn't want to grow. The fancy orchids grew perfectly, but these ones, they're just nightmare. So I made a change. I got me a grow tent, I got me lights, I got me a humidifier, dehumidifier, CO2, and a lot of patience, and they're growing like crazy right now. More than 45 to 50 centimeters a month. So if this continues, I created a monster.